Welcome to Deerwood School. We're just going to ask everybody to start to stand for canopy, please. Everyone can be seated. Just wanted to take a second to welcome everybody. Obviously, this is our Remembrance Day ceremony that happens to be on Indigenous Veterans Day, and we're excited to acknowledge both of those days. We have a lot to get through today. I just want to remind all of our students that this assembly is a little bit different than a lot of the assemblies that we do. Lots of times we come here to celebrate achievements, but today's assembly is about reflecting and honoring and remember service for our country and people who have fallen to die for our, or who have fallen for our freedoms. And so we're going to limit the applause. We're not going to be cheering. And yeah, take some time in the quiet times to think and reflect. At this point, I'm going to have the grade 4s come on up. We have a number of presentations today, so the grade 4s are going to kickstart things today. The grade 4 class is going to be reciting the poem In Flanders Fields. Thank you, grade fours. Next, local elder Ron Cook is going to lead our school's grade 3 to 8 Nahayawewen drum group in an honor song. Come on up, drum group.
Tansi. Kihiwa ka kanoy na megondet tesene kasun, maskwanto tem. Umaniga mwena witu tamak, maskwaniga mwena oma. Agona na sukite hewen kamine goyak. Aniga inde not nige etik. Aniga kaganawen takik kipiata gamine mino taskik. Intonipu sukite hewen kitaya etik. The song we're singing today is called the Bear Song. For us, the bear represents courage. Sukite hewin, we call it, a strong heart. For those that fought in the wars, those that fight, protect our countries, they have to have those strong hearts to do the work that they've taken on. And so we honor them today with a bear song.
Big thank you to Elder Ron Cook and the grade 3 to 8 Cree Drum Group. Real privilege to have them here today with us, and that group exists in our school, so we're lucky to have them. Next up, I'm going to have Miss Boychuk's grade 5 class will come up, and they're going to recite the poem "Why Wear a Poppy" by Don Crawford.
Why we wear a poppy?
Please wear a poppy, the lady said, and hold one forth, but I shook my head, then I stopped and I watched as she offered them there, and her face was old and lined with care. But beneath this scars the years have made,
There remained a smile that refused to fade,
a boy came whistling down the street.
bouncing along with carefree feet.
His smile was full of joy and fun. "Lady," said he, "may I have one?" When she pinned it on, he turned to say, "Why we wear a poppy today?"
The lady smiled in her wistful way and answered, "This is Remembrance Day, and the poppy there is a symbol for the gallant men who died in the war. And because they did, you and I are free. That's why we wear a poppy, you see." I had a boy about your size with golden hair and big blue eyes.
He loved to play and jump and shout, free as a bird. He would race about as the years went by. He learned and grew and became a man as you will too.
He was fine and strong with a boyish smile, but he seemed such a little while. When a war broke out and he went away, he still remembered his face that day.
When he smiled at me and said goodbye, "I'll be back soon, Mom. Please don't cry."
But the war went on and he had to stay, and all I could do was wait and pray. His brothers told him of awful fight.
I could still see it in my dreams at night.
With the guns and teams and guns and full barbed wire.
And the mines and bullets and the bombs and fire.
Till at last the war was won, and that's why we wear poppies, son. The small boy turned as if to go, then said, "Thanks, lady, I'm glad to know. That sure did sound like an awful fight, but your son, did he come back all right?" A tear rolled down each faded cheek. She shook her head but didn't speak. I slunk away in a sort of shame, and if you were me, you would have done the same.
For thanks and giving if oft delayed,
Though our freedom was bought and thousands paid,
and so when we see a poppy worn
let us reflect on the burden borne
by those who gave their very own,
when asked to answer their country's call.
that we at home in peace might live,
Then wear a poppy, remember and give. By Crawford.
Thank you, grade fives. Next, we're going to have the grade 3 class. Ms. Calabanca's class is going to come up and they're going to recite the poem Remember. Thank you, grade 3s. Next up, we have the grade 2 to 6 choir is going to sing Take 1 Minute to Stand by Manitoba composer Craig Castles. Great job by our grade 2 choir. Again, very fortunate to have Mr. Frigo leading that group, and yeah, wonderful to have. At this point, I'm going to ask that everyone could please rise for the playing of the last post. It's going to be performed by a grade 11 student, a former Deerwood student actually, Darren Reed. After the last post has been played, we're going to have 2 minutes of silence. So we're going to ask that it be super quiet in the gym, and then the 2 minutes of silence will be followed by the reveille. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Ooh. Thank you, everyone. You can be seated. Okay, we have a few unique guests with us today who are going to come up and say a few words. Our first guest today is Trudy McKinnon. Trudy is the Deputy Minister of Veterans Affairs. Come on up, Trudy.
Good afternoon, everyone. Elders, veterans, students, and families. Thank you for being here today at Deerwood School to gather to mark Indigenous Veterans Day. This is a time to reflect. This is a time to reflect on the many important contributions of Indigenous veterans who have made an amazing and large contribution to Canada's proud military history. We must first, however, acknowledge that despite their service and sacrifice, when many Indigenous veterans returned from overseas, they were treated with, they were discriminated against, and they faced systemic racism in trying to access services and benefits, and they did not get the respect that they deserved or the respect that we gave to other veterans returning from overseas. And so it's critical that we right this awful wrong. And we do this not simply by reflecting on their contribution and military service, but also through action. And so Veterans Affairs Canada has recently entered into an agreement with the Assembly of First Nations to take certain steps towards reconciliation and recognizing the service and sacrifice of our Indigenous veterans here in Canada. In doing that, we pledge to work with Indigenous veterans to make sure that they're aware of the services and benefits that we offer to them at Veterans Affairs. We also want to ensure that we continue to increase Indigenous representation at all of our commemorative ceremonies, just like we're doing here today. It's so important, especially with the youth, that they understand the service and sacrifice that Indigenous veterans made to our country. In addition to that, we continue to work to do outreach with our veterans across the country. Just recently, we've visited over 40 different Métis, Inuit, and First Nations communities in order to speak directly to Canada's Indigenous veterans and to ensure that they know about our services, but also to ask them what it is they need to live their most healthy and productive lives. We're also very proud of the ceremonies that we support through our Commemorative Partnership Fund and providing funding so that we can have these types of ceremonies annually to mark Indigenous Veterans Day and Remembrance Day across the country. And with that, I would like to say that as we honor our veterans here today who served across the country, we're grateful for their service and for everything that Indigenous veterans have done to safeguard peace and prosperity, not just here in Canada, but around the globe. And so today, I am honored to be here with you to pay tribute to them, lest we forget. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. McKinnon. Next up, we have a guest here, Corporal Bruce Moner, retired, and has a special presentation for us. He's going to teach us a little bit about some Indigenous veterans and some of the Indigenous veterans that came from northern Manitoba as well. So come on up, Mr. Moner.
While not often enough acknowledged, the military service of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis in Canada has deep roots. It's so important that we recognize, commemorate, and remember their sacrifices. So today, November 8th, we come together to mark National Indigenous Veterans Day, honoring the important contributions of Indigenous peoples in service to Canada. As we reflect, we remember those who lost their lives and those whose lives were changed forever. We hold their loved ones, families, and communities in our hearts. While the exact statistics are difficult to determine, the rate of Indigenous participation in Canadians' military efforts over the years has been impressive. These determined volunteers were often forced to overcome many challenges to serve in uniform, from learning new language and adapting to cultural differences, to having to travel great distances from their remote communities just to enlist. The challenges they faced often extended to their post-service life. Many Indigenous war veterans would not receive equal treatment compared to other Canadian veterans like myself. Indigenous Veterans Day is observed in Canada today in recognition of Indigenous contributions to military service, particularly in the First World War, Second World War, and the Korean War. National Aboriginal Veterans Day was first observed here in Manitoba on November 8, 1994, and has since been observed nationwide. In the First World War, 4,000 Indigenous men left their communities to fight for Canada to become warriors. More than that signed up for the Second World War. They were some of the most adept riflemen, most fearful soldiers in a great fighting force. Yet they returned home to an ungrateful nation. Recognition that they deserved time and time again was denied. Here are a few examples of incredible Indigenous warriors. This is Francis Pegam. He was given a medicine bag by a community elder before he deployed. He carried it with him until he lost it in a military hospital where he was recuperating from a gas attack. But he carried the spirit throughout his life. Peggy, as he had been known, joined the Canadian military on September 15, 1914, a month after the war had been declared. By the end of the war, he would be responsible for an extraordinary 378 confirmed kills and captured over 300 enemy combatants, almost 700 Germans he would be single-handedly take out of the war in a 4-year period. After the war, Peggy would be one of 39 British Empire soldiers awarded the military medal, our third highest medal, with 3 bars. He was a true war hero. After the war, he wanted to start a farm near Parry Sound, Ontario, where he was from. He made the application under the Farming Settlement Act, but his Indian agent denied the request. Despite being one of the most decorated Canadian soldiers in the war and single-handedly taking out the equivalent of a battalion of Germans, he was rejected by a man that did not serve a day in the war. It got worse. Despite being gassed twice and suffering from lung issues that forced him to sleep in a chair, he would apply for a pension, and it would take him 13 years to get that pension. Even after that, he would still have to prove to his Indian agent that the money was not being spent frivolously. But he was a warrior. He continued to fight for his people decades after he left the battlefields of Europe. He was elected chief of the West Suquixing First Nation in Ontario. He led a delegation to Ottawa demanding Indigenous rights and served as the first supreme chief of the national Indian government. He was one of the last holdouts refusing to cut his long hair in the face of cultural assimilation. When he died, it would be another 8 years before Indigenous peoples would get the right to vote. This next veteran I want to tell you about is named Tommy Prince. He's the most decorated Canadian veteran in our history. He was born in a canvas tent in Petersburg, Manitoba in October 1915. Tommy Prince was recruited out of his cadet program in residential school. Tommy Prince became a Canadian hero at a time when Aboriginal people were still discriminated against by the government. During World War II, Prince enrolled in the 1st Canadian Special Services Battalion. As the name suggests, the group was one of the first modern Special Forces units, performing highly dangerous missions behind enemy lines. Prior to deployment, the team trained rigorously in stealth tactics, hand-to-hand combat, the use of explosives, amphibious assaults, and alpine warfare. Prince's particular role was that as a scout to go forward and observe enemy movements. His unit terrified German soldiers, who called them the Black Devils, because of their ability to sneak behind enemy lines and kill Germans in the cover of darkness. As one of Prince's officers recalled, he moved like a shadow. Sometimes instead of killing the Germans, he'd just steal something from them. After the war, Prince returned back to civilian life, but then he rejoined again, for the Korean War and fought bravely there as well. After that, Tommy Prince fell on hard times and spent his last days living in a Salvation Army shelter and died at Deer Lodge Hospital in Winnipeg on the 25th of November, 1977. He was 62. Next slide. This here is a local veteran. On the right, Sandy Beardy and his brother Rose. They landed on D-Day in Normandy on June 6, 1944. Just days prior, Rose had a dream that he wasn't going to make it through the D-Day landings, and his dream proved true, and he in fact died 10 days after. Sandy had to go and identify his brother's body, and that night he cried himself to sleep, but he had a dream that his brother came to him and told him that everything was going to be all right, and that he had to come home and tell his story. And Sandy Beardy did just that. And he came home to Cross Lake, where he became a chief, and he went to the Meech Lake Accords in 1988. And when he passed, he wrote down, before he passed, he wrote down the story of him and his brother's days in the war. This next soldier is Percy Lobman. He is also a local veteran from Manitoba, and he served in the Korean War. In fact, he was mentored by Tommy Prince, and he was injured twice in the Korean War. And when he came home, him and his wife of 62 years had a very happy family of 8 children, many of whom are still amongst the community today. One is a teacher at Wapanuk, Miss Margaret Dumas. Percy passed away in 2017, but his memory still lives on. And that's why I want to tell you all and invite you all tonight at the Canadian Legion at 4:30. We are going to be unveiling a Northern Indigenous Veterans mural, and all 700 names of the Indigenous veterans that fought in this area is going to be put on display today at the Legion. I welcome you all to join us. But there are Indigenous veterans who are still serving with distinction, such as this soldier on the far right, sitting down. His name is Jason Funnell. I served with him in Operation Medusa, and he got the 3rd highest Medal of Bravery. On September 3rd, 2006, during Operation Medusa in Afghanistan, Corporal Funnell of the 7th Platoon Charles Company braved intense enemy fire to come to the assistance of his comrades trapped in a disabled vehicle in an enemy kill zone. Ignoring his personal safety by twice crossing ground covered by effective enemy fire, Corporal Funnell successfully assisted in the treatment and evacuation of his injured and killed comrades while returning effective fire. His brave and professional actions saved lives and allowed the orderly withdrawal of his platoon under heavy fire. Now I want to finish with this one last slide. The man you see behind me, his name is Arthur Fourstar, and he is not a veteran, but his father was. In fact, his father was away fighting in World War II when he, a 5-year-old boy, as a 5-year-old boy, had an RCMP officer and a priest burst into his house. And they took Arthur to residential school while his father was away fighting the war in Canada. According to the Truth and Reconciliation report, students at residential schools had a 1 in 25 chance of dying in residential schools, while the soldiers fighting in World War II had a 1 in 26 chance of dying in the war. And yet many residential school survivors, like Tommy Prince, still signed up to protect a country that treated them so poorly. That is why we must remember. That is why we must take time today on the 8th and remember all these great Indigenous warriors. Thank you.
Thank you, Corporal Moner. Next up, we have another drum group who's going to be making a, presenting another honor song, an honor song of remembrance. If you guys want to come up, thank you. Veteran songs, right? Thank you, everybody. Ooh. Thank you, everybody. Next up, we're going to have our invited elder, Mr. David Sanderson, to bring a prayer for peace and hope.
Hurry up, boys. I'm going to be praying. Enigok, isagasteg bisem, enigo, enitag magage, nipia, enigo, epimitsiwak, sepia. For as long as the sun shines, for as long as the flowers and the grass grow, for as long as the rivers flow, we will remember the great promise between the Great Spirit and his children. For as long as the sun shines, for as long as the grass grows, for as long as the rivers flow, we will remember the great peace between all nations upon Turtle Island. These words were spoken hundreds of years ago with the commitment that the blood of our children and the blood of our grandchildren should never be spilled upon the back of the turtle. But we will not fear to be called into conflict when required to protect our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren's future. These are the solemn words that were given to all of us by our ancestors. And today we bring them back to life and remind ourselves that we are called upon to build a nation and to continue to build nations that are struggling. May our little ones go forward into their days and into their future, remembering what we have done in our time. This is my prayer. This is my hope. Sawediminan gisemanito, sawediminan gisemanito, sawediminan gisemanito, sawediminan gisemanito. Kah kenaw ni wah kumaganag. Ego si.
Okay, a number of our classes have put together some wreaths, and we're going to take a moment. Miss Ho is going to play some music, and we're going to start with our grade 1s and work up. Then we're going to go grade 2, 3, 3, and we're going to go up. We have a couple representatives from each class. We're going to present a wreath at the cenotaph. I see we have our Constable Unra here, and if our cadets wanted to come up and help out as well, that would be awesome too. I see Ava in the back. Nathan in the back, do you guys want to come up and give us a hand? That would be great. Thank you, everybody. That kind of concludes our ceremony for today. I just wanted to say, Dragons, you did a really, really great job. I know these assemblies are tough, and it's kind of tough to sit on the floor for a little over an hour, and we usually come to the gym and we celebrate stuff. So, Dragons, you did a really great job. I want to thank our special guests who were here today. Really excited that we could acknowledge Indigenous Veterans Day today. I think Miss Ho is going to play some music, and we are going to quietly make our way back to classes. Again, we're going to start with our younger grades. The 1s and the 2s can start making their way back to classes, and then as soon as the class in front of you has left, you can start making your way back. Thank you, everybody.